July 2, 1995, the song on Main Street. When he stepped off the bus that morning, Ash Grove seemed to rise up against the horizon like a memory he had tried too long to bury. The July heat lay heavy on the pavement, pressing against his chest with the weight of something living. Storefronts looked almost unchanged since the day he left. Sun-faded awnings, rust on the lampposts, the same hand-painted sign outside Carter's barber shop that had been crooked for a decade. Even the silence had not changed. Ashgrove's silence was never empty. It was always watching, listening, storing what it heard in the corners of its houses. But silence wasn't the first thing that met him. It was the sound. A melody drifted down Main Street, light and tinny, meant to be cheerful but cutting through the air with an edge that didn't belong to children's games. Bells and chimes, jaunty and false. The song of an ice cream truck. He stopped dead on the corner, suitcase in hand, as the sound bled into his bones. He had driven that tune once, year after year, until the town twisted it into something that had nearly ruined him. The truck rolled into view, crawling past the post office. Its paint was tired and sun-peeled, decals worn into pale ghosts of rocket-shaped popsicles. Children poured out of houses, quarters clenched tight, chasing the jingle like moths to a flame. Parents lingered in doorways, not watching the man inside, only the truck itself, as if it were an old neighbor returned. But the man at the wheel wasn't him. This one was heavier, older, his collar buttoned high despite the heat. He wore a stiff smile that never touched his eyes, a smile rehearsed for photographs. He didn't look like he belonged here, but Ash Grove welcomed him anyway. Coins traded hands, cones dripped under the sun, and the truck rolled on. And then the driver looked up. Just a flicker in the side mirror, quick but precise, locking onto him. The smile held, but the eyes changed. They weren't curious. They weren't friendly. They were knowing. The tune echoed long after the truck turned the corner, clinging to the hot air like smoke. He stood on the sidewalk, sweat pooling beneath his collar, and the weight of 9 years pressed down on him. He had been the one who carried that music through Ashgrove streets in 1986, believing it was honest work. He'd thought he was just selling popsicles to kids, keeping the days steady after his father's death left him hollow. But Ashgrove had a way of bending things until they snapped. By midsummer of '86, whispers began. Coins missing from registers, heirlooms disappearing from nightstands, family trinkets gone without trace. A ring here, a silver spoon there, nothing large enough to draw the sheriff to action, at least not against anyone else. But when the town wanted a name to pin it on, they didn't look far. He was the stranger who lingered too long, the driver who had reason to be near every house, every child. What he hadn't seen then, but could see now, clear as heat shimmering off the road, was how neat the scheme had been. The truck wasn't just a truck. It had been fitted with a false bottom beneath the freezer chest, a narrow space no one would think to open. While children swarmed the music, their laughter spilling over the fences, certain friends of the sheriff slipped behind houses. A brooch here, a pocket watch there, small enough to vanish in a pocket, quick enough to slip into a paper bag. By the time the truck rolled past again, those bags were tucked into the hidden compartment, shielded by the innocent rattle of popsicles above. Tuesdays and Fridays were the chosen nights. The town distracted by baseball at the school field, or bingo in the church basement. The truck's jingle carried down empty streets, and with it, the thefts continued. 8, 10, sometimes a dozen little things in a week, never enough to raise alarms, but always enough to build a quiet fortune. Later those trinkets surfaced at pawn shops in the next county, or disappeared entirely into collections that never should have existed. And when the questions came, when Mrs. Elkins reported her pearl earrings gone, or the Whitaker boy swore he saw someone slip through their yard, the sheriff never looked at his own men. He looked at the driver of the truck. The boy who needed money. The man with no family name strong enough to defend him. By September, the verdict had been delivered in whispers and side glances. He was guilty in the only court that mattered here, the town itself. The sheriff didn't need evidence. He only needed silence. And silence was what Ashgrove did best. That silence had chased him out. And it had held steady all these years, long after he vanished. Until now. He dragged his suitcase to the motel by the highway, where the paint peeled from the doors and the air smelled faintly of mildew. The fan rattled above his bed, stirring the heat into heavy circles. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the tune over and over in his mind. That melody wasn't just a sound, it was the mask they'd used to cover their thefts, the cover under which they'd buried his name. At 12:17 a.m., he heard it again. The same bells, the same jingle, rising through the night. Too loud, too sharp. The melody that belonged to daylight now haunting the dark. He rose, pulled back the thin curtain. The parking lot was empty beneath the orange street lamp, silent except for the buzzing moths. No truck in sight. But the music grew louder. Louder still. As if the truck were circling the motel itself, unseen, the tune scraping along the walls like a blade. And as he pressed his forehead to the glass, the sweat chilling down his spine, he knew the truth. Ashgrove had not forgotten him. It had only been waiting. And the song was no longer fading. It was coming closer. The music did not fade, not that night. It lingered, circling the motel as though the truck were tracing invisible lines around him. By the time the melody finally thinned into silence, dawn was already beginning to bleed pale over the horizon. He had not slept. He had sat at the window, eyes burning, listening to the hum of the street lamp and waiting for the sound to return. It reminded him of the summer of 1986, when the whispers had first begun. Back then, the truck had been his, and he had been naive enough to believe that hard work and a steady smile were enough to buy a kind of belonging in Ashgrove. The children greeted him with nicknames, running barefoot through the dust with their coins clutched tight. He remembers the laughter, the hands reaching up for bomb pops, the soft melting drip of chocolate cones. But behind the laughter, the whispers were forming. Mrs. Elkins lost her silver spoons. The Whitakers said their boy had seen a figure near their shed. A gold brooch disappeared from the blouse of the schoolteacher, Miss Hardy, one she'd worn every Sunday for years. Each loss was small, trivial on its own. But in Ashgrove, small things accumulated into something poisonous. It wasn't long before people noticed the pattern. Tuesdays. Fridays. The same nights the truck lingered longer than usual. He could still hear the way they said it at the diner counter, voices just low enough to sting. Funny, isn't it, how these things vanish the same days he drives by? The kind of talk that spreads faster than fact, the kind that makes evidence unnecessary. By midsummer, the sheriff himself had stopped him. He remembers the way the man leaned against the hood of his cruiser, arms folded, hat tipped low over his eyes. "You like driving that truck, son?" the sheriff had asked. "Yes, sir," he'd answered, heart thudding because he already knew where the conversation was headed. The sheriff's smile had been thin, humorless. "Might be folks are saying you take more than quarters." He had opened his mouth to defend himself, but the sheriff cut him short with a raise of his hand. "Now, I'm not accusing. I'm just telling you how things sound. And in a town like this, how things sound is usually enough." That was Ashgrove. It didn't matter what was true. It only mattered what people could believe without looking too closely. The sheriff had walked away that day, but the words stayed, heavy as a verdict. And then, one evening, he had heard it himself. A hollow clink beneath the freezer chest when he braked too hard at the corner of Maple Street. He had dismissed it then, maybe just a loose hinge. But looking back now, with years of distance, he realized it had been something else entirely. A sound no one wanted him to question. That night in 1995, standing barefoot on the motel carpet, he pushed the curtain aside once more. The lot glowed orange beneath the lamp. No truck, no sound. But something caught his eye. The asphalt bore fresh marks, faint but clear, the circular tread of heavy tires, pressed deep into the soft tar where the summer heat had softened it. They looped around the lot, perfect circles, as if the truck had driven around and around in silence. His pulse quickened. He slid into his shoes and stepped outside, the air warm and still, carrying the faint sweetness of cut grass from somewhere distant. The lot was empty, but the marks were real, shining faintly under the lamp. He crouched, running a finger along the groove in the asphalt. The rubber had been here less than an hour ago. And then he felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Slowly, he lifted his head. Across the two-lane road, beyond the wire fence, a figure stood. Too far to see the face, but close enough to feel the weight of the stare. Tall, motionless, arms at its sides. The shape blurred slightly in the heat rising from the asphalt, but it didn't move, didn't shift. Just watched. He stayed frozen, heart hammering in his chest. He wanted to shout, to demand, but the air clamped down on his throat. A car engine roared somewhere far off, headlights sweeping briefly across the fence line. And in that moment of glare, the figure was gone. The fence swayed faintly, as though someone had just passed through, but the road beyond lay empty. No footsteps, no sound, only the silence pressing in again. He backed away slowly, retreating toward the motel door, the hairs on his arms raised. Inside, the room smelled stale, the hum of the fan suddenly louder than it had been before. He locked the door, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at his hands. The melody had returned to Ashgrove. So had the truck. And now, so had he. The difference was, this time, he wasn't the one driving. And somebody wanted him to know it. Morning in Ashgrove broke heavy and bright, sunlight spilling down like molten brass over the roofs and cracked sidewalks. By noon, the air had thickened into a haze, the kind of heat that pressed against every surface, made every shadow sharp and shallow. It was the sort of weather that had once brought children pouring out of houses barefoot, nickels and dimes clutched tight, chasing after the same sound that drifted now through the streets. The jingle had returned. He followed it from a distance, standing at corners, blending into porches, moving with the rhythm of the crowd. The truck rolled slow down Maple Street, the melody tinny and sharp, a tune from another time that had no right to exist in this one. Its sides still bore the pale rocket pop decals, faded almost white now. The driver's smile, rigid as ever, sat like a mask on his face. Children darted toward the truck, quarters sweaty in their fists, voices rising in chorus. They surrounded it with the same joy he remembered from years before, except this time, he wasn't the one leaning out the window. He wasn't the one handing out cones in the stifling heat. He stood back, a shadow at the edge of the street, watching the ritual unfold. "Mom, it tastes weird," a little girl said as she licked at her vanilla cone. Her voice carried easily over the laughter, too innocent to know it might be dangerous to speak. Her mother, fanning herself with a church bulletin, barely glanced down. "It's the heat, honey. Everything melts strange in July." But he saw it. The girl's nose wrinkled, her tongue pulled back quick, as if she'd tasted something metallic, something wrong. And she wasn't the only one. A boy with freckles made a face, muttered, like soap, under his breath, before shoving another bite in his mouth because the other kids were watching. The driver noticed, too. His smile twitched, just slightly, before he turned back to scoop another cone. From where he stood, the man who had once driven that same route felt his stomach coil. He had known the rhythm of serving children: hand out the cone, take the coin, repeat. It was simple, mindless work. But this man wasn't mindless. His motions were deliberate, precise. Too precise. The way he tucked a napkin around the cone, the way his other hand lingered just long enough beneath the counter before sliding something forward. And then he saw it. The boy in the red cap approached, hand outstretched with a dollar bill. The driver passed him a popsicle, bright red, dripping fast in the heat, and along with it, something else. Small, wrapped in brown paper no larger than a deck of cards. The boy's hand closed around both before darting away, too quick for anyone else to notice. The man watching from the corner felt the hair on his arms rise. He knew that motion. He remembered, too late, how easy it was for such things to vanish in plain sight. A coin in one hand, a package in the other, all under the cover of a song so loud nobody listened for anything else. It was the same scheme, dressed in the same melody, only sharpened by time. As the truck rolled on, he caught the flash of the driver's eyes in the mirror again. Not looking at the children. Not at the parents. At him. As if to say, "You see it, don't you?" He stepped back into the shade of a sycamore, heart pounding harder than the heat should allow. His shirt clung damp to his back, and the taste of dust filled his mouth. He wanted to shout, to warn the parents, to snatch the package from the boy's hand. But Ashgrove wasn't built for truth. It was built for silence. And that silence was everywhere, woven into the rustle of porch fans, into the clink of coins hitting the driver's palm, into the hollow cheerfulness of the tune that looped again and again until it felt less like music and more like a threat. It was the same silence that had ruined him in 1986, when neighbors turned their eyes away and let suspicion harden into fact. The laughter of children rang down the street, high and shrill. Coins clinked. The jingle played. And all the while, he stood in the shadow, watching, remembering, burning with the knowledge that once again, the truck was being used for something far beyond ice cream. By the time the truck disappeared around the bend, the street had gone still again. Children licked their cones, already sticky with heat, their parents retreating indoors. He lingered long enough to see the boy in the red cap slip away behind a fence, clutching that brown paper package tight against his chest as though it were something precious, something forbidden. He turned and walked back toward the motel, each step heavy, each breath filled with the same oppressive heat. He knew the pattern now, the same nights, the same disguises, the same melody binding everything together. The scheme had never ended, it had only changed hands. And in that instant he understood, the town had never needed proof. It had only needed a scapegoat. The truck was never just about ice cream, it was the perfect mask, one that kept turning, summer after summer, until the whole of Ashgrove forgot to question it. Ashgrove had never stopped swallowing its secrets. It only found new hands to deliver them. That night the air never cooled. The heat clung to the walls of the motel room as though the sun had burned itself into the plaster. He sat at the edge of the bed, shirt damp, the sound of the ceiling fan nothing more than a tired rattle in the silence. Every hour that passed he told himself he would sleep, and every hour he stayed awake instead, waiting for the song to return. It came just after midnight. Soft at first, drifting through the thick night like a memory that refused to stay buried. The tune rose higher, louder, until it filled the street outside with its false cheer. He pulled on his shoes, heart already thudding, and stepped into the heavy dark. The lot was empty, but the sound was near. He followed it, across the gravel and out onto Main Street, where the air smelled faintly of fireworks and fried food left over from the day's celebration. The street lamps buzzed overhead, their orange halos barely pushing back the night. He moved quickly, the song guiding him, leading him down streets that had not changed since the summer of '86. And then he saw it. The truck, rolling slow at the far end of Maple Avenue. No headlights cut through the dark, only the dull glow of the dashboard inside, the silhouette of the driver stiff at the wheel. The music played on, too loud for the sleeping houses, too sharp for midnight. He kept his distance, staying in the shadows, each step careful, each breath shallow. The truck crept block by block, the same melody looping endlessly. It stopped once at the corner, engine idling, the tune still blaring. A dog barked in the distance, answered by another, before both fell silent again. He remembered the whispers of '86, how people said he lingered too long in the wrong places. He remembered the sheriff's thin smile, the weight of unspoken accusations. And as he watched the truck idle in the dark, he felt the cruel symmetry of it all. The driver moved his arm, a shadow shifting inside. Something dropped, too quick to see, too small to echo. Then the truck rolled forward again, turning sharp toward the old library. His pulse raced. The library had been closed for years, its windows boarded, its doors chained, its roof sagging under decades of neglect. Yet here the truck went, crawling toward it like an animal that knew its den. He followed faster now, the sweat cooling against his skin despite the heat. The song grew fainter as the truck turned the corner, swallowed by the narrow street that led to the library. By the time he reached it, the truck was gone. No taillights, no music. Only silence pressing down hard, thicker than before. He stood at the gate of the library yard, staring at the crumbling steps. The boards over the windows creaked softly in the warm wind. And there, on the cracked stone landing, sat a box. Plain cardboard, edges damp with dew. He approached slowly, each footstep loud in the silence. Kneeling, he touched it. The cardboard was cool, heavier than it looked. He slid it closer, pried open the flaps with careful fingers. Inside, beneath layers of brown paper, were objects. A silver watch with initials etched on the back. A pair of pearl earrings, one cracked down the middle. A photograph folded twice, edges worn, showing a family on a porch long since repainted. And at the bottom, a child's toy, a wooden soldier with one arm missing, paint flaking but face still smiling. He knew these things. Not personally, not by ownership, but by memory. He remembered the way Mrs. Elkins had wept over her missing earrings. The way Mr. Carmichael had searched every drawer for his father's watch. The way the Whitaker boy had cried for the toy soldier he swore had vanished from his dresser. All of it had been here. All along. His breath caught as he realized what it meant. The scheme hadn't stopped when he left. It had never stopped. The truck kept rolling, the melody kept playing, and Ashgrove kept losing its small treasures, one by one. And the town had let it happen, because they had already named their culprit. He closed the box slowly, the cardboard groaning under his grip. His hands shook, anger rising hot and sharp in his chest. And then he heard it. The melody, faint again, but unmistakable. From behind him, far down the street. The truck was moving again, too far to chase, too quick to catch. He turned, clutching the box, and for a moment he swore he saw the driver's silhouette at the end of the road. No headlights. Just the outline of the truck, framed by the dim, orange glow of a single street lamp, before it slid into darkness once more. The box weighed heavy in his arms. He looked back at the boarded library, at the silent town beyond. The melody had stopped, but it was still inside him, scraping against memory. For the first time since returning, he knew he was holding proof. But proof in Ashgrove had never been enough. He barely slept after the discovery at the library. The box sat on the motel dresser, its cardboard edges damp with sweat from his palms, the weight of it heavier than anything he had carried in years. Each object inside whispered of 1986, of accusations that had chased him out. But it was the final item, the driver's cap folded neatly on top, that froze him in place long after dawn broke. Someone wanted him to know he was still in their story. By afternoon, the heat had settled again, pressing against the motel windows, dragging cicadas into their endless chorus. He left the box behind, locking the door twice, and walked the streets of Ashgrove like a ghost retracing his own steps. It was on Elm Street, near the edge of town, where he finally saw the truck again. Parked in the shade of an abandoned gas station, the jingle silenced, the truck sat quiet, its paint dull under the sun. The driver stood with his back to the road, bent over the open freezer chest. From his angle, it looked like routine work, restocking, maybe cleaning. But the man watching knew better. Because he remembered. Back in '86, he had braked too hard once at the corner of Maple and Fifth, and the sound had startled him, a hollow clink, metallic, coming not from the freezer above but from beneath. At the time, he had dismissed it. A loose hinge, he told himself, or maybe the compressor shifting. He hadn't wanted to look closer, because in Ashgrove, looking closer meant inviting suspicion. Now, watching the driver's deliberate movements, he understood what he had missed. The compartment was still there. The man reached down into the freezer, then deeper, his arm vanishing past where the cold should have ended. When he drew it back, his hand carried not popsicles, but a parcel wrapped in brown paper, edges taped neat. He set it aside quickly, glancing over his shoulder, as though expecting to be seen. The watcher crouched lower in the weeds by the roadside, heart hammering, sweat stinging his eyes. His mouth tasted of rust, the memory of accusation choking him. Then another sound. Gravel crunching. A car pulling up slow. He held his breath as the sheriff's cruiser slid into view, dust curling up around its tires. The door opened with a creak that echoed too loud in the still heat. The sheriff stepped out. Time had thickened him, his hair gone gray at the temples, but his gait was the same, slow, measured, carrying authority like a weapon. He didn't glance around, didn't need to. He moved straight to the driver, his shadow falling across the open freezer. "You're late," the sheriff said. His voice carried sharp in the still air. The driver stiffened. "Had to take a longer route. Too many eyes today." The sheriff's smile was humorless, the kind that never reached the eyes. "Eyes don't matter. Ashgrove sees what I tell it to see." The watcher's breath caught. He leaned forward, straining to hear more, the weeds brushing against his arms. The sheriff reached into the freezer, tapped the hidden panel with his knuckles. A dull, hollow thud. "Still holds?" he muttered. 30 years and it still holds." Then, almost casually, he added, "He'd remember that sound, wouldn't he?" The driver hesitated. "You mean? Don't play dumb." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "He's back. I've heard. They say he's been watching." The watcher felt ice crawl down his spine despite the heat. His name wasn't spoken, but it didn't need to be. The sheriff's voice carried it without sound. The driver shifted uneasily. "What do you want me to do if he gets close?" The sheriff leaned closer, his words dropping low. "If he comes near the truck, make sure he finds exactly what we want him to find." Same as before. The watcher's breath came shallow, his pulse strumming in his ears. His body screamed to run, to get away before their eyes turned toward the weeds where he crouched. But his legs held still, his chest locked in silence. The sheriff closed the freezer with a heavy slam, the sound echoing like a door sealing shut. He turned, scanning the lot once, his gaze brushing the road, the gas station, the weeds. For a moment, their eyes almost met across the distance. And then, slowly, deliberately, the sheriff smiled. The sheriff's gaze had followed him long after he left the gas station. Even when he turned corners, even when he ducked through alleys, he felt it pressing against his back like a weight he couldn't shake. By the time he reached the motel again, sweat-soaked and hollow, he knew one thing with certainty: Ashgrove hadn't just noticed his return. It was already moving against him. The box from the library still sat on the dresser, the driver's cap perched on top. He looked at it once, then shoved it under the bed. Proof wasn't safety. Proof was only bait if the sheriff controlled the story. He needed something stronger. The next morning, he walked to the old library. Officially, it had been closed years ago, funding cuts, talk of mold in the basement. But the building still stood, stone cracked, windows boarded, its front steps sagging under the weight of years. The front door was chained, but Ashgrove's locks were never more than gestures. He slipped through a side window, glass long since broken, and landed in the dust. The air inside smelled of paper and mildew, thick with the weight of things forgotten. Rows of shelves leaned tiredly against one another, their spines sun-faded, their titles peeling. In the corner, a stack of town newspapers sat bundled with twine, left behind like the bones of memory no one wanted to disturb. He tore the twine with shaking hands and began to read. Ashgrove Gazette, July 1987. Local family reports missing keepsakes. Ashgrove Gazette, August 1988. Church fundraiser earnings misplaced. Ashgrove Gazette, July 1989. Jewelry theft remains unsolved. The words blurred with dust, but the pattern was sharp. Year after year, the thefts continued. Always small things, always on the same nights. Tuesdays. Fridays. And always, the town found a way to soften it. Lost. Not. Stolen. Misplaced. Not. Taken. By 1990, the Gazette barely printed the reports at all. Because why should they? Ashgrove had already named its villain. Him. He sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, stacks of yellowed paper rising around him, and let the fury burn in his chest. They had used his name to silence themselves. They had used his absence to cover their thefts. And all the while, the truck rolled on, its music loud enough to drown out the truth. Deeper in the archives, he found council records. Pages brittle and thin, ink faded, but still legible. Budgets, expenditures, handwritten notes and margins. And there, in a ledger dated 1986, a line item caught his eye. Secured assets transferred to Town Hall vault, per sheriff's orders. His breath caught. Assets. Not evidence. Not even property. Just assets, as though the town itself had absorbed the stolen pieces. He flipped through more ledgers. 1987, 1988, 1991, each summer, new assets, listed. Watches. Brooches. Silver flatware. The handwriting varied, but the phrasing never did. All of it moved to one place. The vault in Town Hall. He closed the ledger, dust rising around him in a cloud. His heart pounded, his hands trembling as he stacked the papers neatly again. He knew the vault. Everyone in Ashgrove did. It was said to hold old deeds, tax records, marriage licenses. But beneath that, hidden behind a door only a few had the key to, it held their secrets. He stayed in the library until the light outside turned gold, until the cicadas swelled loud again. Then he slipped out the way he came, the evening air hot against his face. The town looked ordinary as ever, children riding bikes, porch fans turning slow, the smell of grilling meat drifting down the block. But he knew better now. The truth was written in the dust, in the forgotten papers. The thefts had never stopped. The town had simply buried them deeper, into ledgers and vaults where no one would ask questions. And if the sheriff had his way, no one ever would. As he reached the edge of Main Street, he heard it again. The jingle. Not close, not loud, just faint, carried on the wind like a threat. He froze, every muscle tense, eyes scanning the street. The truck wasn't there. But the tune was. It threaded through the air, thin and sharp, like laughter slipping between cracks in the silence. He turned in a slow circle, searching shadows, alleys, doorways. Nothing. Only the song, drifting from everywhere and nowhere at once. And then, beneath it, a sound more human. A whisper. His name. He spun, but the street was empty. The porch swings creaked. The church bell chimed faintly in the distance. But on the ground at his feet lay a scrap of paper, folded once, stained with dust. He bent, unfolded it with shaking fingers. Inside, in jagged handwriting, were 4 words. We kept everything safe. By the end of that week, Ashgrove had dressed itself in bunting. Red, white, and blue ribbons fluttered from porch rails. Hand-painted signs announced the annual parade, the fireworks, the pie-eating contest in the churchyard. The smell of barbecue clung to the air, carried on smoke from every backyard grill. On the surface, it was everything Ashgrove wanted to be, a small American town holding tight to its traditions. But he had lived in Ashgrove long enough to know that surfaces lied. The library's notes still burned in his pocket. We kept everything safe. The words scratched at him as he walked down Main Street, past shop windows draped in flags, past children rehearsing for the parade with streamers in hand. Every smile looked rehearsed, every laugh a little too sharp, as though the whole town were performing for an audience that had yet to arrive. And at the center of it all, like a centerpiece in a false display, sat the truck. Parked at the corner near the diner, its panels scrubbed, decals touched up with fresh paint, the truck looked almost new. Its jingle spilled into the street on repeat, too loud, too cheerful, looping endlessly until the notes blurred into static. Children clustered around, parents nodding approval. A banner hung nearby. Ashgrove's Pride, the sweetest sound of summer. He stared at it, bow rising in his throat. Pride? Sweetness? The very thing that had been used to destroy him, the very mask that had hidden theft after theft, now held up as a symbol of the town's joy. He slipped through the crowd, keeping to shadows, his eyes fixed on the driver. The man's smile was as stiff as ever, the same mask, the same practiced curve of lips. He handed cones to children, accepted coins, nodded at parents. But beneath the routine, his motions carried that same precision, The same pauses, the same quick slips of brown paper. No one saw. Or maybe they chose not to. He drifted closer to the alley behind the diner, sweat trickling down his back. The sound of the jingle carried even here, tinny and distorted against the brick walls. And then he froze. Voices. 2 men stood in the shade by the dumpster. He edged closer, back pressed to the wall, straining to hear. "You'll have it ready by then?" a voice asked. The sheriff. His tone was calm, steady, the same voice that had condemned him without words 9 years ago. The driver's reply came lower, uneasy. "It's a lot this time. More than usual. I'm not sure we can move it all before." "You don't have to move it," the sheriff cut in. "We'll bury it after the fireworks. No one will ask questions then." Bury it. The words sank into him like ice. The driver hesitated. "And if he—" "Don't say his name," the sheriff snapped. A pause, heavy as thunder. Then softer, colder. "If he gets in the way, we'll make sure he disappears for good this time." Ashgrove knows how to forget. The man listening in the shadows clenched his fists until his nails cut into his palms. Every instinct screamed to rush at them, to drag the words into the open, to force the crowd on Main Street to hear what their sheriff truly said. But Ashgrove didn't listen. Ashgrove didn't see. It chose what it wanted to believe, and it buried the rest. He pressed back into the wall, hard hammering, sweat slick against brick. The sheriff's boots crunched on gravel, moving closer. He held his breath, the sound of the jingle still circling, circling, circling. The sheriff stopped just short of the alley mouth. For a long moment, silence stretched, broken only by the faint squeal of the tune drifting from the truck. Then the sheriff chuckled softly. "We've been doing this for years," he said. "One more summer won't change a thing." The driver murmured something in reply, but the words were swallowed by the street noise. When the footsteps faded, the man in the shadows finally exhaled. His chest burned, his hands shook, but his mind was clear. They weren't hiding anymore. They didn't have to. The town itself had become their accomplice. And now he had a choice: stay in the dark as he always had, or pull their secrets into the light no matter the cost. He stepped out of the alley, the jingle wrapping around him like a noose. Across the street, fireworks stands popped with color, children shouting over prices, parents laughing too loudly. But all he heard were the sheriff's words, sharp and final. "We'll bury it after the fireworks." Sleep did not come after the sheriff's words. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the fireworks bursting red and white above Ashgrove, and beneath them the image of the sheriff lowering a crate into the earth. When he woke, the taste of ash lingered on his tongue. The next day, Ashgrove went about its business in a way that made his skin crawl. Main Street was bright with bunting, porch rails draped with flags, children laughing in the distance. But to him the laughter was hollow, rehearsed, like lines from a play everyone knew by heart. He had heard enough whispers, read enough ledgers, found enough boxes. All of it pointed to one place: Town Hall. The building loomed at the center of Ashgrove, its stone cracked but proud, the clock in its tower frozen forever at 2:17. As a boy he had come here with his father to file tax forms, to listen to dry council meetings, to watch papers shuffled and stamped. It had seemed so dull then, so ordinary. But now, standing in its shadow, he felt only unease. The walls looked too solid, as though they were not just holding records but guarding secrets. Inside, the air was cooler, heavy with old varnish and paper. Portraits of past mayors lined the halls, their painted eyes following him as he walked. Townsfolk shuffled about, women clutching forms, men muttering about permits, a clerk balancing a stack of envelopes. No one paid him more than a glance. He kept his head low, his steps steady, his heart hammering against his ribs. The vault lay in the basement, tucked behind filing cabinets and a stairwell that smelled of damp stone. Most people believed it held deeds, licenses, marriage records. But he knew better. The ledgers at the library had named this place again and again. Assets transferred. The door was steel, its surface dulled with age, a brass keyhole tarnished nearly green. He expected a fight, a struggle with locks and tumblers. But when he pressed his hand against it, the knob turned easily. Too easily. As though someone had left it waiting for him. The vault yawned open with a groan. The air inside was still and dry, cooler than the hallway above, smelling faintly of dust and metal. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, lined with boxes stacked neat, each one labeled in tidy handwriting. For a moment he simply stood there, overwhelmed, the silence pressing against his ears. It felt less like a room than a mausoleum, one that didn't hold bones but the fragments of lives. He pulled a box from the nearest shelf, dust puffing as he set it down. Inside lay jewelry, watches, trinkets, each tagged with slips of paper bearing names. Mrs. Elkins, pearl earrings. Carmichael, gold watch. Hardy brooch. Every name matched a memory, a whisper, an accusation that had once landed on him. He opened another box. Inside lay a child's toy soldier, paint flaked from years of handling, its wooden arm missing. The slip of paper read, Whitaker boy toy. He remembered that boy's tears in '86, swearing someone had taken it from his dresser. And the sheriff had nodded, eyes sliding toward him, as though the toy's absence were proof enough. Row after row, box after box. Lockets engraved with initials. Silver flatware bound with twine. Pocket knives, tie pins, even family photographs. The vault wasn't a storage room. It was a graveyard of stolen lives, organized into neat, careful rows so the town could pretend nothing was missing at all. At the back, on a desk layered with ledgers, he found the record books. The same careful handwriting he had seen in the library, only clearer here, preserved in the cool dark. He flipped page after page, each summer listed, each item catalogued, each name written with bureaucratic precision. And then he stopped. His father's name. Written neatly in the left column, beside a single item, gold pocket watch. The breath left his chest. His father had carried that watch every day of his life. He could see it even now, the way his father would pull it from his vest pocket, snap it open, run his thumb across the glass before tucking it away again. A habit so ingrained it had been like breathing. But when his father died in '86, the watch had vanished. The explanation was simple at the time, misplaced in the hospital, maybe sold in desperation, maybe forgotten. He had been too deep in grief to ask questions. But here it was, listed like contraband, an asset filed away under the sheriff's orders. His hands shook as he traced the faded ink, as though touching his father's name might somehow bring the man back. The ledger blurred before his eyes, the neat lines of handwriting bending, twisting. He thought of his father's funeral, the closed casket, the murmured condolences from neighbors who already whispered behind their hands. He thought of his mother, silent and hollow after, unable to explain why certain things in the house were gone. What had his father known? Had he resisted? Had he stumbled too close to the truth, the same way his son had now? The vault seemed to grow smaller, the shelves closing in. Each box whispered to him, each tag another reminder of what the town had stolen, not just from him, but from his family, from everyone who trusted Ashgrove's silence. Footsteps echoed above. He froze, snapping the ledger shut. Voices drifted down the stairwell, clerks returning from lunch, their chatter casual, unaware of the secrets stacked beneath their feet. He forced himself to breathe, shoved the ledger back onto the shelf, and slipped out the door, closing it carefully. The lock clicked with a softness that chilled him more than force ever could. The vault wasn't meant to stay locked. It was meant to stay ignored. Back on Main Street, the sunlight felt harsher than before. Fireworks stands bustled with customers, children laughed, parents gossiped. The world spun on unchanged. But inside him, something had shifted. He had come back to Ashgrove thinking the town had destroyed only him. Now he saw the truth. His father's name was written in the same ink as every theft, every secret, every lie. The rot had touched his family long before it touched him. He walked back to the motel, each step heavy, each sound muffled under the roar in his ears. The building loomed in the distance, shabby and tired, but at least it was his. Inside, the room smelled of stale air and cheap detergent. He sat on the bed, head in his hands, trying to steady the tremor in his fingers. And then he saw it. On the nightstand, where nothing had been when he left that morning, lay a gold pocket watch. His father's watch. The chain coiled neatly beside it, the glass polished, the hands frozen at 2:17, the same time as the clock in Town Hall's tower. He hadn't taken it. He hadn't touched it. Yet here it was, waiting for him. The vault wasn't just holding its secrets. It was sending them back to him, piece by piece, like a message only he was meant to read. Ashgrove woke early that Sunday, as if the whole town had been waiting for this day. Flags rippled from porches, paper lanterns swayed in the heat, and the air carried the thick smell of charcoal and sweet corn roasting. By noon, the streets were already lined with folding chairs and children clutching sparklers, their faces flushed with sun and excitement. The annual parade was the town's pride, its tradition, the one day each year when Ashgrove forgot its worries and performed its own innocence. But he no longer believed in Ashgrove's innocence. He stood on the far side of Main Street, blending into the crowd, his collar damp with sweat. Around him, neighbors waved, laughed, and shouted greetings, their voices rising above the sound of drums from the high school band. Red, white, and blue floats crept down the street, each one gaudy with crepe paper and hand-painted slogans. The mayor rode in an open car, waving with a grin too wide to be real. Children darted between legs, waving flags, their laughter sharp against the steady beat of the drums. And then came the truck. Its jingle cut through the brass of the marching band, louder, sharper, as though the town itself leaned into its melody. Freshly painted, polished, draped with a banner declaring, "Ashgrove's sweetest tradition." The driver sat tall behind the wheel, smile fixed, arm raised in mock salute. The crowd roared its approval, as though the truck itself were the Grand Marshal. He clenched his fists. That same truck had stolen his name, buried his father's memory, swallowed the lives of half this town, and yet here they cheered it as if it were holy. But today, the mask would slip. He had spent the last 2 nights planning. The box from the library, the note from the vault, the watch on his nightstand, they weren't just fragments anymore. They were pieces of a weapon, one built from the town's own silence. And he would use it. The parade turned onto the square, the truck pulling to the curb as children rushed forward with coins. He slipped from the crowd, heart hammering, weaving between shoulders until he reached the back of the truck. The driver was distracted, handing out cones, laughing hollowly at parents' jokes. No one noticed him. No one ever noticed him until it was too late. He reached under the bumper, fingers brushing the latch he remembered from 9 years before. The hidden compartment. He pulled, the metal groaning softly, and the panel swung open. Inside lay parcels. Brown paper, taped neat, stacked in rows. Some small, some larger. He pulled one out, tore it open with shaking hands. Silver spoons. Mrs. Elkins' set, the initials still etched into the handles. Another parcel, a man's signet ring, the crest engraved deep. Another, a stack of photographs, black and white, faces staring up from decades past. Every piece catalogued, stolen, hidden beneath the sound of laughter. He felt bow rise in his throat. The crowd pressed closer, the jingle blaring, the sheriff's voice booming somewhere nearby as he shook hands and clapped backs. No one saw him crouched at the back of the truck. No one saw the truth spilling from paper wrappings at his feet. He reached deeper, pulling more, faster now, the rage in him hotter than the July sun. Lockets, watches, brooches, toys. And then he found it, the gold pocket watch. His father's. Not the one that had appeared on his nightstand, but another, identical, etched with the same initials. He nearly dropped it, his hands trembling. 2 watches. One in the vault, one here. Which was real? Which was planted? He didn't have time to decide. The drums rolled louder, the sheriff's voice carried, the crowd laughed. He took the parcels, shoved them into the open, scattering them across the pavement. Silver clinked, gold gleamed, paper tore. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman pointed. That's mine! A man pushed forward, face pale. My father's ring! Children froze, cones dripping in their hands, as adults surged forward, recognition dawning in their eyes. The laughter turned sharp, then silent, replaced by murmurs, questions, shouts. The sheriff's voice cut through. Step back! Step back now! But it was too late. The items lay bare on the pavement, undeniable, familiar to too many hands. The silence that Ashgrove had clung to for years cracked under the weight of memory. He stood, chest heaving, sweat dripping into his eyes. For the first time since 1986, the town wasn't looking past him. They were looking where he pointed, at the truth they had ignored, at the mask ripped from their summer tradition. The driver's smile faltered. The sheriff's face hardened. And above it all, fireworks whistled into the sky, bursting red and white against the blue. The crowd gasped, distracted, but the truth lay at their feet, glittering in the glow of sparks. The fireworks split the night sky into shards of red and white, their thunder rolling over the square like distant gunfire. Children clapped their hands to their ears, mothers laughed too loudly, fathers cheered with forced bravado. But beneath the spectacle, the square was no longer celebrating. The silver spoons gleamed on the pavement, the signet ring winked in the torchlight, the brooches and watches scattered like bones from a shallow grave. The crowd pressed closer, the murmur swelling, faces paling as recognition dawned. That's my mother's necklace, she lost it in '88. I knew it. I knew something wasn't right. They told us it was him, they told us he took it. The words rose like smoke, bitter, unstoppable. The sheriff barked commands, his voice hard, but no one listened. They bent to the ground, hands trembling as they picked up pieces of their lives, stolen years ago and hidden beneath the jingle of a truck. The driver stood frozen, his smile shattered, eyes darting toward the sheriff, toward the crowd, toward the open compartment yawning behind him. His hands twitched at his sides, then gripped the wheel as though he could vanish back into the safety of the cab. But Ashgrove had seen. And once Ashgrove saw, it did not look away. A man lunged forward, holding the ring aloft. This was my father's! You let us think he stole it himself! His voice cracked, rage and grief twisted together. Others shouted, some sobbing, some cursing, all turning not toward the driver but toward the sheriff. The sheriff's jaw tightened. His hand hovered near his belt, not at his gun but at the keys hanging there, the same keys that opened the vault, the same keys that had locked away their memories. He opened his mouth to speak, but the roar of another firework drowned him out. When the light faded, so did his authority. The crowd surged closer. For years, Ashgrove had swallowed its secrets, had nodded at its sheriff, had let suspicion destroy the innocent while the guilty smiled. But tonight, under the crack and glitter of fireworks, the town's silence broke. Hands grabbed at the driver, pulling him from the truck, tearing the mask from his face. He shouted protests, but they dissolved under the roar of voices, each one demanding answers, demanding retribution. The sheriff stepped forward, but for once, his voice carried no weight. He stood at the edge of it all, the man who had returned, watching the storm he had unleashed. He didn't raise his hands, didn't shout, didn't try to claim credit. He only watched as Ashgrove finally faced itself. A woman clutched the pearl earrings to her chest, sobbing. A boy held the wooden soldier, its missing arm no longer a mystery. An old man kissed the locket that had vanished from his wife's dresser. Piece by piece, the lies unraveled, spilling across the square like sparks from the fireworks above. And the sheriff, Ashgrove's pillar, Ashgrove's silence, stood exposed, his face pale under the glow. Someone shouted his name. Another voice followed. Soon the crowd turned, the driver forgotten, all eyes on the man who had guarded the vault, who had whispered orders, who had told them what to believe. The sheriff raised his hands, but no one listened. Not anymore. He stepped back into the shadows as the crowd pressed in, as the square erupted with voices too loud to silence. For the first time since 1986, Ashgrove was not quiet. And he felt no triumph. Only a hollow calm, the kind that comes after years of waiting, years of carrying weight too heavy to bear. He hadn't shouted. He hadn't fought. He had only pulled open the compartment and let the truth fall into the light. The town had done the rest. Fireworks still burst overhead, brilliant and meaningless. Their glow lit the truck, the sheriff, the faces of neighbors he once thought of as family. For a moment, the whole square was bathed in white light, and he saw it clearly, Ashgrove devouring its own. He turned and walked away. Down Main Street, past the diner, past the barber's pole still spinning in the hot night. The jingle no longer played. The truck no longer sang. Only silence followed him, thick and real, no longer the silence of denial but the silence of reckoning. At the edge of town, he paused, looking back once. The sky still bloomed with color, but the square was chaos, shouts rising, truth too loud to be buried again. He touched the pocket watch in his hand, the one from the motel, the one that had ticked once in the silence. Its hands were still frozen at 2:17, but he swore he felt the faintest pulse against his palm. Perhaps Ashgrove would never change. Perhaps its silence would return one day, covering new sins. But it no longer mattered. His revenge was not in shouting, not in punishing with his own hands. It was in letting the town consume itself, in making them choke on the secrets they had swallowed for too long. And as he turned toward the dark road beyond, the night air heavy with smoke and gunpowder, he allowed himself one long breath. Ashgrove had remembered him. And now, it would never forget.